Hi guys, so today I thought I would do a video all about my favourite self-published books. So I certainly read a lot more traditionally published literature than I do self-published literature, as I very much realised when I was looking for books for this video. And I completely support the traditional publishing industry as somebody who worked in it and continues to work with it. I think there's a lot of benefits to the structure of traditional publishing, the jobs it provides, the expertise it provides to authors, etc, etc. But I also realise that there is still, problems of diversity in traditional publishing, which means that lots of books maybe get missed or not picked up that are still amazing books, and equally some people just want to self-publish regardless of whether they might be able to get a traditional publishing deal or not. So what I'm trying to say is that I also recognise there are some fantastic self-published books out there, and because of that I want to share with you some of my favourites. Now, a few of the authors on this list I have read multiple books by, all of which have been self-published, and I enjoyed them all, but I'm just going to pick one book from their catalogue to recommend to you today. So without further ado, let's just jump straight in. First up is a self-published novella called Hear the World Entire by Anwen Hayward. This immediately ticks my boxes because it is a retelling of the Greek and Roman myth of Medusa. So if you have heard of Medusa, you probably picture the Gorgon with these snakes for hair who turns men to stone, but actually what a lot of people don't know is Medusa's very tragic backstory and the reason that she ends up a Gorgon or a monster, and the whole unfairness of her situation. It's a myth that I think is incredibly interesting, and I find it interesting our popular reception of it in modern times, because we seem to have very much forgotten Medusa's origins, which, like I said, are tragic, and she's actually the victim of sexual assault by the god Poseidon, and then basically experiences what I can only describe now as victim blaming. And Anwen's book is incredible because it very much takes modern experiences of sexual violence and explores how Medusa may have felt in her circumstances, and it is all from Medusa's perspective. Because of that, it is harrowing, but I think it's a really important retelling. It's a myth I don't see enough retellings of, and I think it's really masterfully done. I think really the book brings Medusa to life for me as a reader, and I thought it was really incredible the way that Anwen kind of put her own little spin on the relationship between Medusa and Perseus. I think highlights a lot of those themes of misogyny and sexual violence through that relationship, and it's just a wonderful novella. It packs a punch in a short space of time. And I will also mention that I've actually interviewed Anwen on my podcast, so if you want to listen to her talk more about the reception of classical monsters and sexual violence in Greek myth, then I will link that episode down below. But she is also a PhD student alongside me, so she has the expertise as well as the creative writing skills to create something wonderful, and she very much has done in this novella, so I would highly recommend it. Next up is one of my favourite self-published authors, and it was difficult to pick which book to recommend to you by this one, but I'm going to go for the classic, which is Radiance by Grace Draven. If I was to mention more books by her, I would particularly highlight Entreat Me, which is a Beauty and the Beast retelling that I love, but I'm just picking one for now, and that is Radiance. This is the first in what is currently a duology, although I think there are plans for future books, and I'm so up for finding out more about Ildiko and Brishan's relationship and future together, because they're one of my favourite literary couples, and you know that because I have plants named after them. I name all of my plants after characters from fantasy novels, and I have an Ildiko and Brishan, so I clearly love them. And for that reason, Radiance is, in my opinion, one of the best romance novels I've ever read. It is a fantasy novel, and it follows the trope of arranged marriages. So we follow Ildiko, who is a human woman, and Brishan, who is one of another magical race that look very different to humans. They are grey skin, they have claws, sharp teeth, black eyes. To humans, in a sense, they are monsters, but equally to this race, humans look ugly and are monsters, and because of that, they meet each other and are like, ew, disgusting, so not interested, but I have signed up for this marriage for my people. I'm going to treat this other person respectfully and get to know them as a human, and neither of them force a romantic or sexual relationship from the beginning of their marriage. Instead, they're like, look, do you know what, we actually get on quite well. Our personalities are quite well suited to one another, let's be pals. And then of course it develops into a romantic relationship. It is one of the most healthy, respectful relationships I've ever seen written in a novel. And that's surprising given the circumstances in which I think the relationship arises. You would think that that's going to be a little bit of an awkward power dynamic in that they are basically forced to get married, although they do consent to it. But it's just beautiful. I love the development of the relationship. I just think it's so well done. And I don't think there is a relationship in a novel that I admire more. And on top of that, it has those fantastical elements which I love. You know, if you add a bit of magic to a book, I'm gonna love it even more than I would have if it was not magical. In terms of drama, there's not actually a ton in book 1. It's more about their developing relationship, and then the sort of drama of that magical world unfolds more in book 2. So in that sense, you kind of have a fantasy romance as book 1 and then a more like fantasy adventure for book 2, and I'll be intrigued to see what happens in book 3. But as long as Ildiko and Brish are in the books, I'm gonna read them and I'm gonna be here for it. So love Grace Draven, like I said, also love many of her other books. Intrigue Me, which I mentioned before, is a standalone, and I've also read the first in another series by her, which the sequel is coming out in a few months, and that is Phoenix Unbound. Also really enjoyed that. There's always heavy romance elements, which I really enjoy, but equally I think she creates really interesting fantasy landscapes to set these romances in, so yeah, 10 out of 10 would recommend. On a similar theme, and actually an author that I think is the reason I ended up reading Grace Draven, which is Emma Hamm, and the book I'm going to mention here is Heart of the Fae. I think I either love as much or more another book by her, but it's actually the 4th book in the Otherworld series. So I'm going to recommend Heart of the Fae. Emma Hamm essentially has this series called the Otherworld series, which are all fairy tale retellings, but the books follow different characters. So book 1 and 2 are a duology that follow a Beauty and the Beast narrative. Book 3 is a Little Mermaid retelling, and I'm currently reading that because it is a standalone, although set in the same world of the Fae. It is a standalone in terms of the main characters and the plot arc. And then I've read book 4 and book 5, which are another duology retelling the Swan Princess, but the characters in book 4 and 5 are characters that are minor characters in books 1 and 2. So I think you would enjoy them more if you've read books 1 and 2, because you will like know a little bit more of the background of those two characters and kind of the setup in the world that they exist in. So Heart of the Fae is where I would suggest starting, and like I mentioned, it is a retelling of Beauty and the Beast, but I think a really unique retelling of Beauty and the Beast that has its own character, its own magic, and I don't think you need to be into Beauty and the Beast retellings to read this one, especially since book 2 very much veers off into its own story arc. But we follow Sorcha, who is a healer woman. She mainly serves as a midwife in the brothel that she's grown up in, and also providing, you know, sort of medicines to prevent pregnancies. And there's a plague ravaging her village that she wishes to cure. So she goes to the fairies, who many people don't really believe in anymore, but she was raised to believe in, and asks for their help. And the fairies say, actually, we will help you find a cure for this disease, but you must go on this journey to this magical Fae island, and there you will find a fairy who will be able to tell you the secrets and give you the cure to this plague. So she's essentially sent on what is a quest, and Sorcha is such a strong-willed, independent, knows who she is, knows what she wants woman, but that doesn't mean her plans can't be thrown out of circulation somewhat, and she ends up questioning her ideas and her plans and what she wants from life when she meets new characters and comes across different worlds. And it is basically her being flung into this world of the Fae, learning more about herself, discovering new ways of healing, and getting to know this fairy who lives on the island, and as of course the Beast character, you know what this is. But again, I love the relationship between Sorcha and the fairy Eamon. I think it's a really fun duology. Love Emma Hamm's fantasy world, and we just pretty much recommend most of what she writes, I think, from what I've read. Another author I've read multiple books by, but my favourite is definitely this book, and that is Briar and Roses by T. Kingfisher. Although, just to mention, I would also recommend The Raven and the Reindeer, because it is a queer retelling of the Snow Queen. But Briar and Roses is my favourite, and it's another retelling of Beauty and the Beast. I know, this is not a Beauty and the Beast video, but there you go, this is the last one. And this one I love the tone of in particular. It manages to combine a very unsettling, creepy backdrop with really like witty humour. So I found myself both creeped out to the max as well as laughing out loud when reading this book, which I thought was a fantastic combination. It's something that's not easy to accomplish, so well done T. Kingfisher for that one. This one follows a much more traditional Beauty and the Beast story arc. We have a young woman who's not sent to this castle by her father, but is a gardener, and I love her character. She's just such a fun young woman, and I love her perspective and the witty comments she makes throughout the book, as well as her banter with the Beast character. But she's a gardener, and she ends up in the Beast's castle picking some flowers, and then she has to stay there. She also has a really positive relationship with her sisters, which I prefer to the kind of female hate trope of some Beauty and the Beast storylines. And she has to leave her sisters, who are obviously sad about it, to go and live in this cursed castle with this beast, who then every evening asks her to marry him in the more traditional storyline, and she says no. She's like, I don't know you, I'm not marrying you. But they do get to know one another and they become very close friends, and she learns more about him. He's actually an inventor, so he very much has his own interest in his own character, and the more they get to know one another, the more she realises that he is not able to tell her everything, and whatever curse is placed upon this castle is preventing him from communicating with her, and that perhaps they are both equally as trapped as one another, and that there's something darker afoot that she has to solve. Loved, 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 like I said, the combination of like witty humour and genuinely creepy atmosphere that T. Kingfisher manages to recreate in this one, and would highly recommend it. Next up is a more recent read, and that is Red Ropes of Fate by K.M. Shea. This I want to call a Fantasy of Manners because it feels very similar in tone to Fantasy of Manners, although I'm not sure if you technically have to be set in a historical period in the real world to be a Fantasy of Manners. But it has those feelings of a cute period romance, but in a fantasy world where both elves and humans live alongside one another. But because of language barriers, most elves and humans can't communicate with one another, and the few people that have been trained to speak both languages are still very much only with a basic understanding. Because the differences are so complex, it's really, really hard to master. However, in order to like sort of retain positive relationships, humans and elves from like aristocratic families are bonded through a magical ceremony, which allows them to experience one another's feelings. So although they can't suddenly speak one another's languages, they can sort of get an idea and communicate better through feelings and just like closeness and knowledge of one another, and this happens on a regular basis. And we of course follow a human and elf who have been bonded. However, theirs is the first bonding to, you know, truly take to the maximum, in that they can suddenly communicate with one another. Although they don't suddenly know one another's languages, for some reason, even when the other one speaks in human or elf, they know what the other one's saying. So they have this bond that has never been seen before, and they are also a male and a female, which is an uncommon pairing, and because of that, naturally a romance flourishes between them. However, of course, there is some drama, and there are people in this kingdom that do not want this relationship to flourish, or the union between their people to take as they could allow it to, so are kind of setting up against them. It's not particularly high stakes, there is a little undercurrent of drama, but it's mainly about the relationship between the elf and the human main character developing, and it's very cute. I'm not sure what other adjective to use because I feel like cute just sums it up, but in the best possible way. Really fun, endearing, easy read that I would recommend to anybody who likes a little bit of a romance or fantasy plotline. Now my last book is kind of cheating because it was originally self-published but was then picked up by a traditional publisher. So I'm sure you already know what it is. And it is of course Eragon by Christopher Paolini. But it's one of my favourite books of all time, and the fact that it was originally self-published I think means that it can still go into this category. And I also just like opportunities to talk about it. So this is the first in the Inheritance cycle by Christopher Paolini, which is a quartet of massive chunky YA fantasy novels. Although they're YA and some people might have assumptions surrounding the YA genre, these are complex complex fantasy novels. They're very much like, you know, in the realms of like high fantasy, of Lord of the Rings, etc, etc. They have complicated worlds, political situations, different races of creatures and their relationships with one another. The plotline is not simplistic, there is drama, there is death. Everything is in these books and I adore them. I have read them all multiple times and cannot, you know, rate them highly enough, to be honest. They also have some of my favourite dragons in all of literature, specifically Saphira, who again, I have a plant named after her, so you know I like it. But the premise of the first book, Eragon, is that we follow a young man in this fantasy world called Eragon, who finds a blue stone in the forest when he's out one day, but it's not a stone. Of course it's not a stone. It's a dragon egg. However, there's actually only one known living dragon in the world of Allegasia at this time. Although dragons and dragon riders used to be common, they were basically killed off by the evil king that rules all of Allegasia, and he now is the only person with a dragon. So people are not happy that Eragon has found this dragon egg. People are hunting down this dragon egg. People want this dragon egg for themselves on both sides, and that puts Eragon in a very dangerous situation, and he basically has to run away with Saphira and the help of a man in his village who used to be a dragon rider but whose dragon is now dead. And thus adventure ensues, we meet dwarves, we meet Urukai, which are a bit like orcs, we meet elves, we meet like demon shades and other creepy and scary magical creatures. There's so much going on here. I absolutely love these books. I talk about them, I feel, reasonably regularly, but it's also fun to know that Eragon itself was originally self-published when the author was only a teenager, and it still blows my mind that he wrote this book when he was a teenager. I could only have dreamed of writing something so masterful in my teenage years. But those are my favourite self-published books. I'm always up for more recommendations of wonderful self-published literature. If you have any in the comments down below, I definitely think there's a leaning here towards fantasy, but I do honestly just come across a lot more self-published fantasy that is within my wheelhouse. But until next time, happy reading, and I'll see you all again soon. Bye guys!